I wake up in freefall. For the first few seconds, there's no sound, no feeling of motion, just weightlessness and the vague sense that something is wrong. The moment inertia catches up, I slam into the restraints and the pressure in my chest makes it clear that the purview is headed somewhere fast. The emergency lights, strips of pale cyan bolted into the bulkheads, cast enough glow for me to make sense of the chaos. Loose gear drifts through the cabin, some of it colliding with walls, some of it tumbling past in a way that suggests gravity is failing by degrees. My seat harness is still engaged, but the weight distribution is all wrong, as if the ship can't decide which way down is supposed to be. I cycle through priorities, find orientation, assess damage, get a sense of control. I grip the harness and brace for turbulence, but none comes. The purview is in a silent dive, a death plunge with no alarms, no proximity sirens, no auto-stabilization. None of the ship's redundancies are engaging. The cockpit door is sealed, but the viewport slats give me a glimpse outside. Something vast moves beneath us, a world with no recorded name. The atmosphere is thin enough to see through, the curvature of dunes stretching into infinity. There is no ocean, no cloud cover, no vegetation, just a wasteland pocked with the skeletal remains of structures so massive that from orbit I mistook them for natural formations. Then the first tremor shakes the ship. The artificial gravity cuts back in violently, snapping me down into my seat like a steel whip. My ears pop and a sharp groan rolls through the hull as the purview begins to break apart around me. I reach for the release on my harness just as impact takes me. The next thing I know, I'm face down in sand, my mouth dry with the taste of metal. Pain filters in slowly, a muted, delayed ache in my ribs, a sharp pulse in my skull. I push myself upright and try to focus. The crash site unfolds around me in pieces, a stretch of scorched desert, the remains of the ship embedded in a crater too wide for my mind to process all at once. It should have disintegrated. A descent from orbit at that speed should have left nothing but vapor and wreckage scattered for miles. But here it is, a gutted shell buried in the dunes. Other bodies are sprawled nearby, some still moving, others clearly past the point of medical intervention. I run an automatic hand check over my pressure suit. The seal along my left sleeve is split, but nothing vital is exposed. My neural HUD flickers in and out of coherence, glitching between readouts that make no sense. The ship's onboard systems should be feeding telemetry, distress beacons, life signs, but instead, it insists we're still in space. No surface beneath us, no planetary mass detected. I've seen my share of bad landings. Exfil runs on collapsing colonies, war zones where the sky is burning and the ground is worse. Spent a decade watching men dig their own graves on the edges of space, some slow, some fast. I was UED Special Operations before they decided I wasn't worth the trouble. The kind of officer they don't call a captain anymore, but the kind men still look to when things fall apart. I stagger to my feet and make my way toward the wreckage. The main hull is still burning in places, but the heat fades fast, absorbed too quickly by the sand. I spot movement along the starboard side, a figure pulling himself from a collapsed section of the hull. Sergeant Tellus. He looks up at me with a half-dazed expression, the left side of his face smeared with blood. His right arm is broken, hanging, but he barely acknowledges it. "Captain!" His voice is rough, breath short. How the hell did we survive that?" I don't have an answer. An hour passes, maybe more. Enough time to pull the remaining survivors together. 7 of us. The transport carried over 40 men, security detail, scientists, prisoners. Most of them didn't walk away. A few remained trapped under the wreckage, some still breathing, some with injuries severe enough that they won't be breathing much longer. Lieutenant Keller asserts himself immediately, barking orders, as if rank means anything here. I let him, for now. The men respond to structure, and structure buys time. I focus on the situation instead. The ship is a loss. The emergency beacon isn't transmitting. The air is breathable, but the oxygen levels are off, just enough to sustain us, but lacking something I can't quite define. And then there's the sky. At first, I think it's just the distortion from impact shock. But the longer I stare, the clearer it becomes. A bloated mass hovering low on the horizon, its edges flickering. There's something about the color, too. A shade that refuses to settle, like it exists between spectrums the eye isn't designed to process. No one else mentions it. Maybe they don't notice. Maybe they're just focused on the more immediate problem, what happens when night falls. Because there's something else, something that's been sitting at the edges of my awareness. The silence. No wind, no atmospheric distortion. Even the wreckage isn't settling. No shifting metal, no crackling flames. It's as if sound exists here on delay, arriving half a second late or failing to arrive at all. Tellus moves beside me, adjusting his splint with a grimace. What now? My eyes drift to the horizon, where a shape stands beneath the starlight, too far to define. A silhouette of something rough and angular. The others haven't seen it yet. They're still looking at the wreck, their minds locked in the aftermath. But I already know we'll have to move. Supplies are limited and the ship won't offer shelter for long. We leave the wreck behind at dusk. The sand has already swallowed half the ship's hull, and Keller's attempts to extract more rations from storage have been a disaster. The crash ruptured most of the containment units, leaving us with barely enough supplies for a few days. Worse, the medkits were in a section that no longer exists. That means no coagulants, no pain suppressants, and no stabilizers. Tellers moves with his arm bound in a ragged sling, his face pale from blood loss, but he doesn't complain. The prisoners, Ortega and Shane, are too tired to challenge our authority. Even Huxley, the last remaining scientist, stays quiet. It's an unspoken agreement. The ship won't save us. We need to find something that will. The ruins are farther than I thought. When I first saw them on the horizon, they looked like distant silhouettes, the kind that should disappear after a few miles. But as we walk, they don't shrink. They stretch taller. The scale of them is beyond anything that makes sense. A sprawl of structures that rise in uneven formations, too massive to be built for human proportions but too symmetrical to be natural. We push forward, moving in a staggered line across the dunes. The sand drags at our boots, slowing progress. The star hovers low, as if stuck between setting and rising, its edges blurred like a smudged reflection. Keller stays at the front, muttering under his breath. I don't bother asking what's on his mind. His hands are twitching more than before, his fingers clenching around the grip of his sidearm. I recognize the signs of a man trying to convince himself that control still belongs to him. When we reach the first structure, the sun hasn't moved. The thing is enormous, twice the height of a dropship hangar, with thick stone walls reinforced by something metallic, a material that isn't quite rusted but isn't smooth either. The entrance yawns open like a mouth carved into the rock, wide enough for a military carrier to roll through. There are no doors, no visible signs of an access system, just a dark threshold leading inward. Tellus is the first to hesitate. Captain, this doesn't look... I know. I cut him off before he can finish the thought. Because I do know, it isn't architecture. It's constructed anatomy, the walls formed from interlocking segments that resemble both bone and circuit plating, fused in a way that suggests neither was meant to exist without the other. The surface isn't smooth. It has a fine mesh of embedded ridges, branching like capillaries beneath a layer of metallic sheen. When I shift my head, the texture seems to retract and extend, not physically moving, but redefining itself between one moment and the next. I force myself to focus on a single point, track the pattern. But the longer I look, the more the lines resist being understood. Shapes press into the periphery of my vision, indistinct until I try to examine them. Then they vanish. We keep moving. Inside, the temperature drops fast. The air here is thinner, as if something has already breathed it in first. The ground beneath us is smooth, a polished surface marred by fractures. Rubble scattered across the floor, fragments of stone, metal shards, pieces of something that might have once been furniture. Then we see the murals. They cover the walls in sweeping strokes, depicting figures kneeling beneath a black sphere, their elongated forms stretched. At first, I assume they're just stylized, but then I notice the details. The arms too long, the torsos concave, the heads tilted as if their skulls had softened and melted before reforming into something else. Keller exhales sharply and Shane takes a step back. "What the hell is this?" Huxley mutters. His eyes dart over the images, flicking between them as if trying to find something familiar, something he can categorize. Ortega, the quieter of the two prisoners, lets out a dry laugh. "A warning," he says, "or a prophecy." We keep moving, deeper into the ruins' corridors, the murals growing denser as we go. They shift in theme. At first, the figures are simply kneeling. Then they are reaching, their long fingers stretching toward the black sphere, their mouths open as if whispering to it. The last set of murals shows what happens next. Their bodies unravel, pulled apart in strands that drift upward, their faces still frozen in expressions that aren't quite agony, but aren't quite ecstasy either. "We should leave," Ortega says. It's not a plea, not a suggestion. It's a flat, dead statement, like a man commenting on the weather. And for a moment I agree. I agree so strongly that I nearly turn back toward the entrance, nearly step back into the desert just to get away from whatever this place is. But then Keller speaks. "No." His voice is thin, reedy. "We stay. We secure shelter. There's nothing here." He gestures at the murals like they mean nothing. Teller shifts uneasily. "Sir, we don't know if—" "I said there's nothing here," Keller snaps. He's breathing too fast and pupils are too wide. Then, from somewhere deep in the ruin, a sound. It's not a noise in the traditional sense. It doesn't echo, doesn't carry. It simply exists. A presence settling into the air like it has always been there. A faint distortion, a ripple in space that presses against my skull without touching it. I glance back toward the entrance. The desert outside is dimming, but the sun hasn't moved. The light itself is draining, like something is taking it in, absorbing it. Then Shane whispers, "Something's out there." I exhale slowly, forcing control back into my muscles. "We stay here for the night," I say. "Weapons ready. No one sleeps alone." No one argues. Even Keller stays quiet now. We settle into a corner of the ruin, setting up what little defenses we can. The corridors stretch out ahead of us, twisting into shadows that aren't quite empty enough. The murals tower above us, their figures still frozen mid-reverence, still waiting for something to answer their whispers. I try not to look at them as I sit down, try not to let the thoughts settle. But it does. And it stays. We are not alone here. And whatever is watching is patient. Sleep doesn't come. Not fully. Not the kind that matters. I keep my back against the stone, rifle across my lap, eyes fixed on the corridor stretching beyond our camp. The others shift restlessly in their bedrolls, bodies twitching at odd intervals the way men do when they dream of places they've never been. Even Keller, who still insists nothing is wrong, breathes too shallowly, his fingers curling in his sleep like he's grasping for something that isn't there. The ruin doesn't settle. Spaces like this should breathe, should groan with the shifting weight of time, but this place just is, unmoved, undisturbed. I start counting my own breaths just to fill the absence. At some point my eyes close. Not for long. A minute, maybe two. But when I open them again, something has changed. I scan the camp, taking in the figures curled in their bedrolls, packs slumped beside them, weapons stacked against the wall. Nothing seems out of place at first. Then my eyes catch the gap. 7 bedrolls, 1 empty. Harlen's. I push to my feet, my rifle already raised before my mind catches up. "Harlen?" No response. Teller stirs. Ortega rolls onto an elbow, blinking sleep from his eyes. Keller exhales sharply as if pulled from a deep dream. The others sit up fast, glancing toward the entrance of the ruin, then down the dark corridor leading inward. I scan the ground. His bedroll is still there, flattened from use, his pack half unzipped with a ration pack beside it, untouched. The dust is undisturbed, no tracks leading away, no indentations where feet should have pressed into the stone, just the empty space where Harlen had been. We stare at the spot for too long, as if looking hard enough will bring him back, as if the shape of him might still be there, lingering just beyond our eyes. It's Keller who breaks the silence. "He walked off," he says, voice tight. "Got disoriented. Or decided to take his chances on his own." It's not a statement. It's a desperate attempt to make sense of something senseless. Ortega picks up Harlen's boots from beside the bedroll and turns them over in his hands. "Left these behind." No one answers. We already know the truth. Harlen didn't leave. Harlen was taken. I step back and scan the ground around the bedroll, checking for any trace of movement. The dust is undisturbed. Harlen was here, then he wasn't. The absence of anything real, no drag marks, no signs of weight shifting, makes my stomach knot in a way that combat never has. Keller straightens, sets his jaw. He's not our problem anymore. Ortega lets out a short, sharp breath, something between a laugh and a scoff. "That right, Lieutenant? Just not our problem anymore." Keller's hand twitches toward his holster. The moment stretches too long. I take a step forward before it turns into something worse. No one moves alone from now on. My voice comes out steadier than I feel. If we're in pairs, we'll know if someone leaves. If we're losing people, we need to know how. We pack up, check our gear. What little rest we got is ruined now, tension replacing exhaustion. Tellers steps up beside me, quiet at first, watching the empty bedroll the same way I am. After a long moment, he exhales through his nose and says, "I saw him during the night." I glance at him, waiting. "He was by the entrance," he continues, rubbing his fingers over the bandages on his arm, just standing there, looking out at the sand. His brow furrows slightly, like he's still piecing something together. "Said the stars looked different." That makes me turn fully. "Different how?" Tellus hesitates, his fingers tightening briefly at his side. "Said they moved." I don't answer. I just look past him, out toward the ruin's entrance and the stretch of empty sand beyond it. By unspoken agreement, we break camp and push deeper into the ruins. The air in the corridors isn't stale, but it isn't moving either. It's a dead weight, holding the temperature steady, pressing in without pressure. The walls here are different from the outer chamber. The circuits are denser, the metallic ridges rising in patterns that suggest directionality, as if leading deeper into the structure. The murals return, but they've changed. The kneeling figures we saw before are now reaching upward, arms raised toward a massive dark circle carved into the stone. The proportions are weird. The sphere isn't flat, it's recessed, as if the material itself folds inward, distorting perspective. The longer I look at it, the more it feels like something beyond the wall, a window rather than an image. Huxley stops beside me. His breathing has quickened. "This isn't natural erosion," he mutters half to himself. "Not weathering. The depth here. This is intentional." His fingers hover over the edge of the carving, not quite touching it. Shane, quiet until now, clears his throat. "You all see that, right?" He's looking down the hallway past the next bend. At first I don't register what he means. Then I do. The shadows aren't aligned with the light. The glow from our wrist lamps and barrel lights angles one way, but the shadows bend another. I blink, try to adjust my focus. The mind wants to correct it, to make sense of what it's seeing. The further we move, the worse it gets. The corridor tilts downward, though the angle isn't consistent. The walls seem closer, then farther, like a space stretching and contracting between blinks. It's subtle enough to doubt, but undeniable enough to make us second-guess our own movements. I keep track of our progress, counting our turns, checking our marks on the walls. After a while, I realize I've counted the same mark twice, a symbol I know we already passed. Then, I notice something new about the murals. At first, I assume it's just a trick of the light, a shifting perception from exhaustion. But the more I look, the more I realize they are not the same as before. The figures kneeling beneath the black sun have changed. Their heads are no longer bowed in submission. Their faces, once undefined in the rough etchings, have gained shape. Angular features, hollow eyes. They are looking at us now. A sharp inhale from Shane. Something just... He stops, shakes his head. I thought I saw... Then the sound comes. It's not a noise, not in the way voices or footfalls are noise. It doesn't echo, doesn't carry. It simply arrives, pressing against my skull like a thought I didn't summon. The walls shift at the edges of my vision, not moving, but reorienting, like a structure that has been subtly but fundamentally rewritten between blinks. The hallway ahead feels longer, the distance between us and the next turn stretching, though none of us have moved. Then Keller laughs. The kind of laugh a man makes when he's not in on the joke, just desperate to pretend he is. We all turn. He's staring at the mural behind us. The figures, the black sun. They're kneeling, he says. His voice sounds different, not like it has changed, just like it's coming from a different place. He turns his head toward us. And now we are too. I don't realize I've moved until my knees hit the ground. Not just mine. Shane, Tellus, Huxley, all of us. My mind rebels, screaming that I haven't made the decision to kneel, that my body has been overridden. I feel the tension in my muscles, the resistance, but my limbs don't obey. It's not submission, it's alignment. Something is positioning us. A deep, gut-wrenching certainty settles into my chest. The murals are not just records, they are instructions, and we have followed them. I grit my teeth, force a breath through them, straining against whatever force has taken hold. Every muscle in my body feels like it's being wrenched into place by unseen hands. Then suddenly, the pressure releases. We lurch forward, breath ragged, hands catching against the stone floor as the weight vanishes. The moment Keller spoke, the moment he acknowledged it, the force broke. Huxley is shaking. Shane swears under his breath. I push myself upright and look back at the mural. The figures are still there, frozen in reverence, but now their heads have turned slightly toward us. We keep moving, pushing deeper into the ruins, away from the mural, away from the thing that made us kneel. The passage narrows slightly, then splits into a descending stairway, carved with the same patterns that coil like branching veins across the walls. The ground beneath us is unnervingly smooth, like the stone has been worn down by something other than time. Huxley walks close to me, his hands twitching at his sides. He keeps stealing glances back, his mouth pressing into a tight line. "They turned," he mutters. He's not looking at me. He's just saying it out loud, as if speaking the words will make sense of them. "Their heads." "I know," I say. "Keep moving." The stairway spirals deeper. The deeper we go, the more the walls change. The symbols here are denser, layered over each other like overlapping circuitry, lines breaking apart and reconnecting in ways that feel mechanical, but also biological. The material shifts too. No longer just stone, but something with an odd sheen. Not quite metal, not quite organic. Ortega runs a hand along the surface as we pass, his fingers moving across one of the larger grooves. He stops suddenly, pulling his hand back, staring down at his fingertips. "Warm," he murmurs. "Not stone. Feels..." He exhales sharply. "Feels like it should be cold." The descent continues. The stairway is wider than it should be, as if built for something larger than human proportions, yet the steps are just shallow enough to accommodate human movement. It's the same thing that's been unsettling me since we entered the ruins. This place wasn't built for us, but it was made to accommodate us. Shane slows his pace as we round another turn, his grip tightening on his rifle. "There's something ahead," he mutters. I follow his line of sight. He's right. The stairway opens into a vast space, a sunken hollow beneath the ruins, its ceiling arched like the inside of a rib cage. The floor ahead is a vast platform of interlocked plates, rising slightly in the center like the heart of a machine. Across the walls, the symbols have been carved deeper, gouged into the surface rather than etched with precision. Unlike the murals above, these don't depict figures or celestial bodies. They depict structure, schematics, instructions, something made to contain rather than depict. And in the center of the chamber, partially embedded in the platform, is a machine. I approach, scanning its surface. It's large, 20 meters across, maybe more. A mass of concentric rings, some partially buried, others rising and exposed like the vertebrae of a long dead thing. The outer layers are smooth, but the inner components shift subtly, recalibrating, adjusting, as if aware of our presence. Huxley kneels beside one of the exposed panels, running his hand over the surface. "This isn't just old," he murmurs. "It's running." Shane shifts beside me. "What do you mean running?" Huxley doesn't look at him. "I mean it's active." The silence that follows is too long. Then, deep beneath us, something shifts. A tremor. Not the kind caused by tectonic movement, not the settling of stone. It feels deliberate, responding, as if something beneath us has been waiting for us to arrive. The breath in my chest goes shallow. "We need to leave," Ortega says. I step back from the machine, my eyes still scanning its shifting layers. I don't understand it, not fully, but instinct is pressing in from every angle, screaming the same thing. This isn't a machine meant to power something, it's meant to contain something. And that something just woke up. We start back toward the stairwell, stepping carefully, moving fast but measured. The tremors don't repeat, but the silence in their wake is different now. Not just absence, but a space where something is listening. We reach the base of the stairway when Shane stops abruptly. His entire body locks, shoulders rigid. I turn to him. "What?" His breathing comes too fast, too sharp. "Transmission," he says. My stomach drops. "From who?" Shane doesn't answer right away. He's staring at his comm, at the weak signal struggling against the static. Then he exhales, voice brittle. "Harlen." The transmission stutters, skips, then stabilizes into a voice. Harlen's voice. "Where did you go?" The words scrape through the speaker, distorted but unmistakably his. "Why did you leave me?" Tellus grips his rifle tighter. I take a step toward Shane. "Is it looping?" Shane shakes his head slowly. "It's dark here." Huxley exhales sharply. "That's not possible." But we all hear it. "I can still see you." The voice isn't coming from the speaker anymore. It's coming from the stairwell above us. Every nerve in my body locks. Ortega's breath comes out in a short, sharp noise, half panic, half disbelief. I glance up the stairwell. It's empty, the passage curling back into shadow the way we came. But we all feel it now. Something is here. Not footsteps, not a figure. Just the unmistakable weight of presence. Then the voice changes. "You shouldn't have come down here." Not Harlan's voice anymore. Something else. Something that has been here much longer than us. The machine behind us emits a shuddering release, like a mechanism that has just been unlocked. We don't hesitate. We run. The ruins stretch around us, the angles of the walls leaning inward like ribs in a carcass that was never meant to be opened. The ground beneath us isn't solid anymore. It holds weight, but doesn't resist. We feel the sinking sensation even when we stand still. The black sun is rising. The sky has folded around it, a vast shape that eats depth, twisting space into something unrecognizable. The desert has begun to lift in sheets, sand rolling upward as if pulled by an unseen tide flowing in slow spirals toward the center of the sky. Keller is the first to go. He stopped speaking back in the stairwell, walking just a step behind us, his breathing low and shallow. When I glance back, I see him staring upward, his face slack, his lips slightly parted like something has taken his name from him. "Keller," I say it like I'm testing the word against the air. No response. Then he tilts forward. A motion that isn't falling but acceptance, like something just loosened inside him. His feet leave the ground, his body rising slowly, legs still straight, arms drifting out slightly from his sides. It's only when I blink that I realize he's already coming apart. Not all at once, not violently. The layers of him unravel the way old paper does, thin, fibrous strands peeling upward, detaching into ribbons of pale light stretching toward the black sun. His eyes stay open longer than they should. Then they are gone too. I watch until the last thread of him disappears. Tellers grips his rifle like a lifeline. Ortega and Shane back toward the ruins, but there is no shelter left. The sky is tilting, the dunes rolling in slow upheaval, turning in on themselves. The stars beyond the black sun are moving, not shifting naturally, but rearranging, twisting into patterns that refuse to stay still. There is nowhere to go. The sand is curling into itself, the horizon dragging inward. Ortega is next. His breath shudders, his eyes flick between us, and then, without a word, his shape loses definition. His body thins at the edges, like charcoal smearing on a surface, dissolving into something lighter, less whole. His fingers stretch into filaments, his torso unspooling, breaking down into something that isn't quite light, isn't quite absence. He doesn't scream. Shane does. He turns, starts running, not toward anything, just away, but his steps stagger, slow, his body dragging against itself, as if caught between two states of existence. He reaches a few paces before his back arches sharply, his arms jerking out like something has wrenched him from inside. Then he splits apart, like threads being pulled from a fabric. The unraveling is slower this time. He is still there, still human, but stretched too thin, each strand of himself being pulled upward, one by one, until the space he occupied is nothing but a long, bending filament of light that is still moving, still aware, still trying to hold shape. Then it joins the sky. Huxley stares after him, his mouth moving, but there are no words. I turn to Tellus. His jaw is clenched, his fingers gripping his weapon so tightly that his knuckles have gone bloodless. He looks at me like he knows, and I hate that I can't tell him anything that matters. He raises his rifle, aims at nothing, and fires. The shot breaks against the air like sound itself is bending around it, twisting the recoil into a muted, stretched distortion. The bullet never lands. I watch it curve, not forward, but upward, curling toward the black sun like it's been claimed mid-flight. Tellers grits his teeth, his breath hitching, his arms trembling. He turns to me, opens his mouth, then he shatters. Not like glass, not like bone breaking. Like a structure collapsing in perfect sequence, a shape programmed to fall apart exactly as intended. The pieces of him stretch upward, spiraling in clean strands. He is gone before I can say anything. Huxley drops to his knees beside me. I don't know when he stopped walking. He clutches his head like he's holding himself together, his breath thin, ragged. "I don't want to go," he whispers. The black sun is almost fully risen now. I don't feel my feet on the ground anymore. The ruins are folding inward, the dunes bending into long, reaching spires that stretch skyward like a world shedding its shape. Then Huxley stiffens. His shoulders lock, his arms snap straight at his sides, his back arches, and I watch as his body breaks apart piece by piece, lifted in delicate strands toward the sky. I am the last one left. I don't move, I don't try to run. There is nothing to run toward. The sky is pulling inward, the horizon is gone, the planet is erasing itself one layer at a time. I feel it start in my hands. The fingers separate, stretching, unwinding in long, weightless filaments. It moves up my arms, my chest, my neck. I don't feel pain. I don't feel anything. I see a shape beyond the black sun. Not a void, not an object. Something bigger, something that was never meant to be known. My thoughts splinter, my name dissolves in my mind. I can feel my last breath stretching into a long white filament, joining the strands of everything that came before. Then, I understand, and I come apart.